go. Back to the chat. Right, lovely. Right, okay, well, welcome, and it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back, and we'll hopefully be able to push ourselves a little bit further today with our Greek, and you might well have had some chance at least to look at some of the work which we were looking at last week. I know it's only been a week, and so don't worry if you haven't had a great deal of time just to look at the verbs and this sort of conjugation that we were doing, this sort of different endings. Don't worry too much. You've got a bit of time then to build on that with what we do today. So you can see that plan today is to do a little bit of an English grammar check. Certainly from conversation, it seems as though launching straight into some of the crazy Greek stuff that we do means that we actually probably just need to drop back and think a little bit about the English part that we're used to doing, but perhaps we haven't thought about how it's called, what it's called, or how it's named. So we're going to look at that firstly. And then we really want to start getting into thinking about some basic sentences, and basic sentences are going to be made up of verbs and nouns. So we're going to look at some nouns and how we start to write some of the nouns in Greek, and then we'll need to quite quickly, really, after we've looked at some nouns, really sort of get looking at this thing called the definite article, the idea of a definite thing that we're talking about. So we're going to look at that as well, and that should give us enough then to really start to sort of build up some simple basic sentences. So that's what we want to do today, and we will, if you had a look at the starter, we'll kind of start there, just a quick match up. So hopefully if you've got your list in front of you, you've been able to compare it, you've been able to remember which goes where, then you'll remember, I'm sure, that this is the third person singular, so something like she has. Okay, this was our ending for our third person plural, so we want a they have. This was our first person plural, so we've got we have, and exa we did again for some reason. Quite sure why I've been giving you the same one twice, but there we are, we have. So we have she has again, I suppose. Then we have exase, which is you have, and remember that in Greek there is a difference between the singular and the plural, and so in this case is actually the singular. And then the final one, which is echo, which is the way you see the root word if you were looking in a dictionary. So we have I have. Okay, so we didn't write you have in plural, so if you know what that is, you might remember that we want ex et, which is probably what I was supposed to write for number 4, but never did. So those are our kind of standard endings. We had a stem to our word, we had an ending. So let's leave that there. We'll come back to our verbs, which we're looking at, and we'll kind of add to them. So I'm going to move on to the English grammar, and we're just going to talk through that to start with. And I just want to kind of talk through some of the words that we use. Maybe you were taught some at school or you weren't. If you're still at school, you might well remember some of these things. So this might seem a bit basic to some, but I think it's probably important that we check on that. I don't know if we just can zoom in on that. I'm not going to write anything on this particular part. I'm just going to talk through some of the things to hopefully kind of contextualize what we're going to talk about. English and Greek are different in terms of the way that they present things, and so when we read Greek and what we're learning, it's going to come across slightly different to our English. So firstly, verbs you'll possibly remember, and you'll describe them as doing words, and nouns are things, people, objects, or things. So when we talk, when we read, when we write things down, we do things, we talk about doing things, and those things have a kind of time reference. So I can talk about things that I'm doing at the moment, which is in the present. I can talk about things which I was doing before, which are in the past, and I can talk about things in the future, which I hope to do. So we have, in a basic sense, we have the present tense, we have the past tense, and we have the future tense. And really, just to start with, we want to just think about when we talk about sentences. When we talk about sentences, we are going to have for a basic sentence a verb, something that's happening. So we need a subject. We need somebody that's doing the verb. Okay, and they are quite often doing something to something else. Okay, and that's known as the object. So we have a subject, which is what the sentence is, who the sentence is about. We have the object, which is really what happens or something's kind of happening to it. Okay, so a couple of examples. At the moment, we could say that David is teaching Greek. Okay, and we have in English two ways of kind of talking about the present tense. We in English use the verb to be quite often in what we do. It's known as an auxiliary verb. It kind of helps our understanding. So David is teaching Greek. David is the subject. Greek is the object. And the teaching part is the verb. But we could shorten that and we can just say David teaches Greek, which kind of suggests that's what's happening right now. And that's known as the present active. Now, I'll come on to why it's active. And at the moment, we're only going to think about this idea of being active just means that the subject of the sentence is doing the action of the verb. So I'm doing the teaching. Okay. So we have a present active verb. Now, if we go to the past, so hopefully if this doesn't do that, and we actually move the box away. Oh, this was my plan here. Oh, right. I know. We'll do it like that. There we go. Right. Let me just get rid of that as well. So if we go to the past in the active, then we might say that David was teaching Greek. Okay, so that's what I was doing before. I was teaching Greek or I taught Greek. Okay, so we have a way of talking about something in the past. That's the past tense. That is still active. I did the action of the verb to Greek. Okay, and then if we go to the future, we would write that I will be teaching Greek or I will teach Greek. Okay, so again, there are kind of two different forms of how I'm the subject doing something either in the past, the present, or the future. Okay, and they're all active. Now, just briefly, and we won't touch on this for a bit of a time, active goes with passive. Okay, so in terms of language, we talk about passive. So when something's passive, then the subject of the sentence isn't actually doing the action of the verb. So I'm just going to switch it around like this and put in the present. So look in this one here to start with in the middle, this one here. That in the present passive, so Greek is being taught by David. So if you think about what's actually happening, I'm actually doing the teaching. I'm doing the action of the verb, but we've written it in a different way. We have a clever way of doing our language, you see, and sometimes we want to emphasize things. So we have a way of being able to write things what seems to be backwards, but still means the same thing. Okay, and that's a passive way of writing a sentence. So present passive just means that now the subject is essentially what the verb is being done to. So Greek is being taught by David, all right? Or in the future, Greek will be taught by David. So it's future passive because David is the one who will be doing the teaching. So we are going to just concentrate just for the moment on this one middle box here, which is the present verbs. We're not going to worry about past tenses. We're not going to worry about future tenses. We're not going to worry about passive tenses. Okay, we're just going to think about the sentences that we can write to do with this. So all the verbs we were learning last week were to do with the present active. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at how can we write subjects and objects in Greek. Okay, and it's a little bit more complex than the way we do it in English. English is a little bit simple in that sense because I could write when I'm written as a subject or when I'm written as the object, then my name doesn't change. I don't write it any different way. And the same with almost all the words that we use. We don't change them. So let's have a little think then about how the Greek words use. Hopefully, if there are any problems with that, any questions that anybody wants to raise, hopefully we're kind of like in a situation where we can look now at some of the Greek that goes with it. So if we want to move on to the next tab down, right, so if you can just zoom in, so that's kind of big enough. I'm going to fill something into the little table we've got there. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about nouns first before we build up some basic sentences, but we'll get onto those quite quickly. So we talk about subjects and objects, generally speaking, in English. When we look at the Greek and when you look at books that are written about Greek, then you'll see that you'll see that they talk about the nominative. Now, in a basic way, we're going to think about the nominative case. Just write this down here. The nominative case is really talking about the subject of a sentence, and the accusative is another case. We'll talk about cases and I'll bring them up at some other point. But for the moment, I want us just to consider that we're thinking about, in a basic sentence, something which is known as the subject, but in Greek we'll talk about the nominative. Okay, and and the object of our sentence is going to be known as the accusative. And the reason why they're cases is because in Greek they actually have the words, the nouns have different endings. So like the verbs had different endings, we're going to find the nouns have. Okay, so it's going to take a bit of a while to get used to the fact that a word has a different ending, but it's going to mean the same thing. Okay, it just depends on where it appears in the sentence. So let's look at a word, right? So the word I've given you here is adelphos. Okay, and you're probably getting more familiar with using Greek letters and how they sound. So this one together, adelphos, means brother. And it's a masculine word. Again, something a bit different to our English language. We just have nouns. Lots of other languages, you'll have different genders for words. If you've done French, German, Spanish, they all have genders. Okay, so the same with Greek, we've got masculine words, and I'm just going to look at some masculine words with you. And masculine words have a certain way of writing. So here's a word, brother, adelphos. Okay. Now, when it's a subject and the singular, so when I talk about a brother doing something, in the singular, the subject of the sentence, then we write it as I've written it. Okay, so it is adelphos, right? And it's made up of a stem, which is in this case adelph. Okay, the alpha, delta, epsilon, lambda, and phi. And then there's a little ending, which is the bit that's going to change depending on where brother ends up in the sentence. Okay, so for the nominative, we have adelphos. All right, so the ending is the omicron sigma. Now, if brother is in the accusative, i.e. it's the object, then it changes. The first part, the stem, which is adelph, stays the same, but instead of omicron sigma, we have omicron nu. So it goes to adelphon. Okay, so we're going to be able to identify in a Greek sentence whether brother is the subject or whether it's the object of the sentence by its ending, because its ending would change. Okay, now there are singular and plural, so we have brothers. For those of you that have brothers, you'll know how much fun that can be. Brothers is written as adelphoi. Okay, so it's got the same stem, it has a different ending. If we wanted to talk about brothers in the subject of a sentence, we'd write adelphoi. And if we wanted to write brothers as the object of a sentence, we'd write adelphus. Okay, so we have four basic endings. Okay, they are Omicron sigma, Omicron iota, Omicron nu, and Omicron epsilon sigma. All right, so those are kind of your basic endings. So once you've got a noun, you need to work out what the stem is, and then the ending is going to change depending on where it is in the sentence. Right, so give you a couple of examples. You will find that it's a little bit easier to translate Greek than to write Greek. You'll find that, you'll discover that as you go through, just because the endings are already there and the various different anomalies that you get in the language will appear before you rather than you have to try and remember it. So, adelphos didaske. Right, so if we wanted to try and translate that, firstly, we need to identify what the stem is, so that we are working, so we know what word we're working with. So we have our stem here, adelph, and then we have our ending. So that's going to now tell us, according to our little table above, that of course it is as I've written it, adelphos. So we're talking about a brother here, okay? So we want a brother, and that's the subject of our sentence that we're writing. All right, and then we'll move on to this word here, and we'll recall that didask sounds like a verb, didaske sounds like a verb, and it is. It was a verb we were looking at last week. It's from didasko. So we now need to look at having identified the stem of our verb, which is didask, and then it's got its own ending. Right, now the ending here needs to agree with the subject if the sentence is going to make any sense. Okay, so that is of course the third person singular. All right, and the third person singular, which is he is teaching, or she is teaching, or it is teaching. So in the context of this particular sentence, brother is male, so therefore didaske must be refer to he is teaching. So obviously if we write down the sentence, we're going to write down a brother is teaching. Right, and that's what we do when we're going to translate. We're going to have to identify our words. So obviously, that's why we need to learn the vocabulary, because we're going to have to learn the stems, then the endings that come with it, and then so that we can piece together the words into a sentence. So if we go to the next one, let's have a look at what we've got now. We have didasko. Okay, so didasko, trying to keep it sort of simple enough so we can see what's happening. Didasko. Again, if we take the stem and its ending, it's a verb. It ends in omega, so it is the first person singular. So in this particular case, this is I am teaching, all right, or I teach. Okay, so we might just write it down as a sort of a continuous idea. I am teaching. I am teaching. Okay, and then we look at this adelphon. So getting the idea, we've got a stem and we have an ending. And what we'll notice is that according to our little table that we have, is that it's a singular and it's in the accusative. So this is the subject. This is the person that I am teaching. I am teaching a brother. So we would write down a brother. I can spell brother. I'm teaching a brother. Right. All good so far? Let's just have a look at taking a couple of English simple sentences and turning them into Greek. So brothers. So brothers, when we look at brothers, we have to obviously identify ourselves, whether we're referring to a singular or plural. We in English, we stick an S on the end in lots of cases to identify the plural of something. So we have a plural word now. So we want a plural of adelphos. So then we need to establish whether brothers is the subject of our sentence or whether it's the object. So in our English sentence, we've got brothers are teaching. Brothers is the subject. They are doing the teaching. Okay, so we need brothers in plural. So we're going to use adelphoi. And then we need to work out how we're going to write the action of the brothers, which is their teaching. So their teaching, we're talking about plural here. So we need to use the verb for teach, which is didasko. And then we need to work out from our endings which ending is going to agree with a plural subject. All right. So we need to go to the third person plural for didasco. And so we think through and we look through our list and we know that we're going to use our main stem, didask. And then we'll remember that the third person plural is usin. So didaskusin. So we have brothers are teaching. And the verb has to agree with the noun that it's linked to. Okay. Finally, we're teaching brothers. So I've done one of every combination just so that you can kind of get the idea. We are teaching. So we are doing the teaching, not the brothers. So the subject here, there is no subject given, and we don't need to do anything for that in Greek because the verb incorporates the we or the I or the he, she, it. Okay, so we're going to use the verb didask. And then we're going to go for our first person plural because we are, and that's omen. So didaskomen means we are teaching, and now we're putting in a subject. We're going to describe who we're teaching. We're teaching brothers. Okay, so we're just going to take the plural of our brothers because it's in the accusative now. It's the object of our sentence. So we're going to have Adel Fus. Okay, no, so the basics of a sentence, just at this stage, is that we have a subject, we have an object, and we have a verb. Okay, now in English, it's important for us to put the words in an order. If I write something like, can you just scroll down a little bit just so you can see one thing underneath it? Right. If I write David is teaching BB, right? That's my wife. Then I could write BB is teaching David. Now that means something different because in English, the order of our words is important. You put the subject before the verb so that you can tell who is doing what. In Greek, because of the endings, it doesn't actually matter. So if I had taken this one here, which I'm going to highlight, and if I had written it the other way round, come up in a minute, hopefully, right? If I'd written that the other way round, it would still mean exactly the same because a Delphon is accusative and didasko always means I'm teaching. So it wouldn't matter if we had written the sentence Delphon didasko. It still means exactly the same. So the word order in Greek is not important for the sense. And this is one of the first things we're going to appreciate, I think, when we start to read Greek, is that means that we can emphasize things by putting them at the start of a sentence. So if I wanted to emphasize a word, I could put it at the beginning of a sentence in Greek. It's not going to change the meaning. It gives me an opportunity to emphasize something. So I'll leave that point there with you. And what I want you to have a go at doing, if we just move down into exercise A, the sheet, which is some nouns, is to have a little look at perhaps doing some translation yourself. If you can zoom in, don't worry about the vocab. Perhaps you might not be able to see the vocab, but as long as we can see the words. I'm hoping that you've all got access to the vocab in the workbook or in some other place that you've got it. But if we can get it on the screen, that'd be great. So I've given you 6 questions to start with. If you can just do those translations. If you get past those, because you're super speedy, then you can try writing some Greek yourself, and we'll call that the extension. So I'll stop the recording at this point, and then we'll give you sort of a few minutes, see if you can work out what's going on with those. Any questions, obviously either say it or write it in the chat. Okay, so let's just